Well, thank you very much for holding these hearings. And I want to agree with the sentiment that you expressed in the beginning, that America and the world has a strong interest in contributing to reducing poverty and promoting growth in the developing world. Aid can be an effective instrument in achieving these objectives. The multilateral institutions, of which the World Bank is the premier lending institution, play an important role in this global effort. For a variety of reasons, assistance administered through the World Bank and other multilateral institutions can be even more effective in achieving our objectives than assistance provided by the U.S. directly. This is especially true at the current time when American credibility, especially in the developing countries, has sunk to an all-time low. The question is the World Bank today playing the role that it should be playing, and if not, what can be done about it? Even before the recent turmoil at the institution, there was considerable concern about its direction. Large numbers of its senior people have departed in the past 2 years. The most important asset of the institution is its staff, its human capital, and it will take years to replace what has been lost. I want this afternoon, however, to focus on broader, though not totally unrelated issues: how the World Bank should conduct its business, what the development agenda should be, and what the U.S. can do to help ensure that this is brought about. It is in our interest that the World Bank remain strong, credible, and effective. The bank has rightly emphasized good governance and corruption, but the bank can only be effective if it is seen as having good governance itself. There has to be confidence that there is not corruption in the corruption agenda, that there is not a hidden political agenda with corruption in some countries being overlooked, while in other countries there is a policy of virtually zero tolerance. Finally, part of democratic values is due process. The implementation of a corruption agenda itself must conform to the highest standards. With the resignation of its president, the question is the choice of successor, and most importantly, the process by which this is done. Good governance, a commitment to basic democratic values, requires that the head of the institution be chosen in an open and transparent process. It should be the most qualified person for the job, regardless of race, gender, or nationality. It is in America's interest that the head of the institution not simply be chosen by the President of the United States. There are other important changes in the governance of the World Bank and other multilateral institutions that will increase their effectiveness. These require a careful balancing of more democratic accountability and strengthening procedural safeguards. There are reforms to the governance of the bank, the need for which the President's scandal has highlighted, and I want to comment briefly on them. On the positive side, the review process showed that the board could exercise its fiduciary role even in a very difficult situation where the largest shareholder was not fully supportive, setting up a committee that included 4 members from developing and transition economies. In spite of the pressures that were brought to bear, 22 of the 24 directors concurred with the findings of the panel, and realizing that the well-being of the bank required that the President had to go, supported that action. On the negative side, it is clear that the President of the World Bank had enormous elements of discretion in making appointments and circumventing rules and suspending loan programs and directing bank programs with insufficient checks and balances in place and insufficient oversight. Some of the systems designed to provide the checks and balances are clearly flawed, with offices which might receive complaints about presidential abuses actually reporting to the President. Fears of retribution against whistleblowers or those raising complaints were not totally unfounded. The powers of the President had previously not been abused in this way, but the fact that they could be so abused, too, highlights a fundamental flaw in governance. Reform will require careful balancing. There needs to be more accountability of the World Bank, both to the board and to other stakeholders, including donor countries. But this has to be done in ways that avoid excessive politicization of the institution. The bank has created one of the most talented and qualified bureaucracies around the world. Bureaucratic procedures have been put into place to ensure, by and large, they attract and choose highly qualified applicants. But left to themselves, the bureaucratic safeguards could lead to an entrenched bureaucracy pursuing its own agenda, or insufficiently flexible to adapt to changing circumstances, including new learning about the costs and benefits of privatization and liberalization, new attitudes about country ownership, or new agenda, such as those concerning worker rights. The board, working with the President, must establish what the bank's overall agenda and priorities will be. As I argue below, this agenda must be more balanced, more consistent with our own values and consistent with our own practices. While the bank is likely to continue to be focused on promoting growth and poverty alleviation, it is inevitable that there will be changing views on how this can most effectively be done. The board, and not just the president, must play a central role in constructing and improving this agenda, and then ensuring that the president and the staff of the bank implement that agenda in an effective and consistent way. At the same time, the checks and balances and safeguards against abuses by the president of the World Bank have to be strengthened. In the text, I provide details on how that might be done. There are problems of both internal and external governance that I discuss in the text. International economic institutions like the World Bank are at some distance from direct accountability. To address this problem, at least 3 actions are required. The responsibility for the World Bank should shift from Treasury to AID, or should be shared with AID. This is a practice followed by many other countries, and it is essential if the developmental perspective is to remain paramount in dealings with the World Bank. Secondly, there needs to be more parliamentary congressional oversight. The appropriate form of this oversight will need to be worked out. A committee of the parliaments and congresses, including donor and recipient countries, could be formed to review the agenda procedures and discuss widely perceived grievances. And thirdly, there needs to be more transparency, public oversight of decisions both before and after they are made. These reforms, and there are many other reforms in the governance which I have discussed elsewhere, are, I would argue, as much in the interest of the United States as they are in the interest of the world as a whole. No system is perfect. A president determined to evade the set of safeguards put into place may still be able to do so even after those are strengthened. Humans are fallible, and so are institutions that they create. I want to turn to more specific aspects of the World Bank agenda, beginning with corruption. Fighting corruption requires more than just speeches. It requires a comprehensive agenda that includes the development of policies that reduce the scope for corruption. There are ways that the U.S. and other advanced industrial countries can contribute to the fight against corruption, most notably strict enforcement of anti-bribery laws, eliminating bank secrecy, not just for terrorists, but also for tax evasion and corruption, and demanding transparency in payments to governments, for instance, by using the tax code to enforce the extractive industry's transparency initiative. Successful development requires, however, more than just attacking corruption. Aid effectiveness can be undermined not just by corruption, but by incompetence, by the absence of the appropriate complementary policies. It requires a comprehensive development agenda. There needs to be country ownership of the development policies, programs, and strategies. Excessive conditionality undermines this and development effectiveness. While the conditions that have been imposed have been reduced, in many cases they still remain excessive. IMF cross-conditionality is especially problematic. And even as upfront conditionality has been reduced, new forms of hidden conditionality have been introduced through the IDA allocation formulae. These formulae fail to deliver aid to where it is likely to be either most needed or most effective. The challenge to the World Bank and other aid agencies when confronting a country with poor governance is to find alternative delivery mechanisms for aid. It is bad enough that the people in these countries are suffering from poor governance. To be doubly punished by denying aid would seem unfair, especially if there exist alternative ways by which assistance can be provided, especially in health and education, investments in the youth of these countries. The problem is that the conditionalities that have been...
Well, you need to sum up, please, Dr. Stiglitz.
What?
Need to sum up.
Okay. The problem is that the conditionalities that have been imposed in the past have, in some cases, actually reduced aid effectiveness. Moreover, these imposed policies represent values that are contrary to those that are held by the vast majority of Americans. The disparity between what we require of others and what we do ourselves further undermines the credibility of the institution and aid effectiveness. Thank you.